Next producer presentation of the producers at the Cool Climate Wine Summit 2026 in Copenhagen. I have the pleasure to be here with Alex Rinke from the Weingut Rinke in the Mosel region. Hello, nice to see you again.
Great to see you.
I mean,
yeah. So we met last time, I think, in January, and now we met during the
wine actually.
Yeah,
we met in January.
Of course we did. Yeah. So actually, we meet almost every day. In the internet by email.
I would like to state that probably when I look over the course of the last year, I have met you within the last 12 months probably on more days than my mother.
I never met your mother, so I have no idea if that's a good thing or not.
So, no, very, very happy to be here, Alex. And before we dive a little bit into Weingut Rinke, your philosophy, your wine style, and taste some wines, let's start with our open-ended questions that we have for every winemaker. So the first one I want to ask you is, if you would not be a winemaker today, what would be your alternative career path?
I simply cannot answer the question because that's the second part of my life when I decided to make wine. So I started with completely different things, and that's a final decision. So I think I'll keep on winemaking until my last days.
And this comes from that you actually had a long career in more the corporate world, actually?
Yeah, completely different things, engineering and steel and manual cover stuff. So I started making the wines myself in the cellar about 6 or 7 years ago, and started with the winery 19 years ago. So there's this question I really cannot answer because it has been very fatal, actually.
That is very lovely. And looking back on the last couple of years where you now are a full-time winemaker, if you have to point to somebody or like some school of winemaking that really influenced your winemaking style and your philosophy, is there anybody coming to your mind that you would point to?
Of course, it's very simple. So we started about 20 years ago as a consultant with Gernot Kollmann from Batterieberg. And so definitely, if you taste the wines and the style of winemaking, I think that's part of the school I never went through.
Well, I can totally understand that. Also, like after I've met Gernot at Cool Climate Wine Summit 2025, where he also was an exhibitor, and he left me actually like a box of his like mixed Rieslings. And after I tasted myself through it, I definitely see a lot of similarities between his style and your style.
Okay.
It's very clear. Third question.
Well, that makes me a bit proud, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Third question, maybe. If you should describe your personality as a bottle of wine, what kind of bottle would you pick?
I think that's a very funny question because I think that's the authentic way of winemaking, that you simply put in the bottle what you are. And so I think that's about all the wines we make. So that's Marion's and my character. Maybe it's part of the character of our Labradors. The wines are very special. They are not mainstream. They are, some of them are maybe a bit experimental. Let's say not the standard ones. They have a certain clear style, but I think they are anything but mainstream, and I think that's a bit of part of my character.
Also, from how I know you, I would put energetic as a characteristic to them, actually.
Okay, yeah.
Because that is how I often experience you at trade fairs or with all the businesses that you have running on the side and the restaurant that you are driving, where we're sitting here right now and recording this episode, right? So there's a lot of energy going on here, and this is also what I feel in the wine.
That's a great wording. I'll simply use it for the next wine tasting I have. I'm always looking for new,
Beautiful.
That is.
Last question of the introduction round. It's more like an open statement where I want to ask you about nature and what it means for you and the winemaking process and the work in the vineyard and so on and so forth. So what comes to your mind?
We are organic winemakers and we are a member of Bioland. So it's very clear, it's a very clear statement that we respect nature, and we are not looking for high quantities and high volume in wine production. The way we are working in the vineyards and in the cellars, so no additives, just nothing but sulfur. And in the vineyard, we are not digging around and not disturbing the grounds or respecting all the animals in there. I think that's really very natural what we're doing, and it's not a secret, but whenever I'm alone in the vineyard, I'm also playing music to my plants, to the vineyards. And it depends on the year. So some year they prefer Beethoven, and the piano sonatas because I'm playing the piano myself. And if it's a nice, a calm year, they maybe prefer Eric Satie. I'm not kidding, I'm really doing that.
I totally believe you
what
that
we
you're
call
doing
ghetto
that.
blaster, that's what we are carrying, just putting in there. And it's a bit like a disco, but it's a classical one. And I think it works. It works, as it works with the cows and the milk, it works in the vineyard.
But maybe I totally love that approach to also like think it like a little bit more like holistic. Also,
You think I'm kidding? I'm not.
I totally believe you that you do that because I know some other winemakers who do it, and I know that there are like very interesting studies, by the way, about the stuff done in Australia, I think, and so on and so forth. But
even in Italy.
Even in Italy,
yeah,
okay.
Which you shouldn't believe, but it happened.
I think we should. I think it should be like a reminder to link to some of those like articles in the show notes. So if everybody now thinks this sounds crazy, actually there are people doing research about it and researching how like the plant development is affected by the music and so on and so forth, right? So I try to find some good stuff and link it in the show notes because I think people should be a little bit more educated about this. But
that's a good idea.
Maybe your general approach. So Bioland, maybe you can very briefly introduce the principles that you work with as a Bioland winery, and then maybe also like give us a brief history of Weingut Rinke and why you decided to go the Bioland way and the organic way and so on and so forth.
Well, the history of the winery is that we had a crazy idea about almost 20 years ago. And we never planned to become some kind of real winemakers. We just bought some land, and that's the reason why we are making Chardonnay and Burgundy grapes. Because what you call Upper Mosel, Ober Mosel, it's already part of Burgundy, ground-wise.
Yeah.
Because soil-wise, it's part of the Paris Basin, and that means we have shell limestone, and we have Kimbrich formation in the soil, so Kimbrich soil, and that means that that's exactly more or less exactly what you find in Burgundy, in northern Burgundy and Chablis. And Chablis means Chardonnay. And so it's a very simple idea why we decided to make it there. And then you go through from Obermosel, Upper Mosel, through Luxembourg, Champagne. Then you go bit south and come to Chablis and then Burgundy. And that's all part of the Paris Basin. And that starts almost in Trier. A very simple thing. We had the idea about 19 or 20 years ago. At that time, we met Gernot Kommann, and he said, "Oh, I have an idea what you could do there." And then, the crazy story started, and we started with that's what you have in the bottle there, with a field blend, 85% Chardonnay, most of that Sélection Mosel. And some Pinot Blanc and some Pinot Gris and some Muscat and some Gewürztraminer. And that's what's in the bottle there. But most of it is Chardonnay, and that fits there pretty well. But it's quite steep, but it looks like Moselle, but it's actually some kind of Burgundy.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about it, right? That we put the Upper Moselle into the Moselle Valley, but actually it is really the odd one out region when it comes to the soil composition, because everything else is slate dominated, and then we have the shell limestone there and the Paris Basin actually. So it makes like geologically it makes no sense to include it to the Moselle, like only like geographically, I guess, because the river is going there. But
I think we had no choice. So I think it happened over the years and the millions of years. So it's just like that.
So this is like a very, very interesting reasoning behind that. Let's maybe have a look at the first wine. What do you recommend? First a still wine or first a sparkling?
I have no idea, just try it.
Then,
maybe I mix the glasses. So
this is a sparkling here, definitely.
Yeah.
So this is also like something you're very passionate about, right? You do actually like a good amount of sparkling, and you really like to have it on the lees for quite some time, right?
Yeah, up to 50 sometimes. Yeah, I think the longest one we had is 54 months. And that's the other part, the other wineries we have. We are talking about the shell limestone, Upper Moselle, and what you're drinking right now is Saar. So we have some vineyards in Oberemmel and Wiltingen. So that's pure Saar, and in this case, it's 100% Riesling. And I think it was on the fine yeast for 40 months. 40 months, pure Riesling. And all the sparklings we make are Brut Nature. They are all zero dosage.
Which I personally really like about your style, because I had just a discussion like the other week with a winemaker where I was basically telling that I myself, I cannot drink any more Brut. I think for me personally, Brut is a little bit too sweet with the 10 to like 12 grams of sugar that it often tends to have. I'm really like a bone dry type, but I also like know that many consumers actually prefer a little bit of residual sugar, right? So how do you see that with, you only have Brut Nature Zero Dosage wines, right? Or do you also
but
like
I
have some
think
Brut style?
you asked me about the character of the winemakers, so Marion and myself, and I think that's really pure. So that's very authentic, and there's no compromise about that because we don't want to add anything. No sugar, and adding the liqueur dosage always means, in most of the cases, that you're adding sugar. And if you make a zero dosage Brut Nature, of course it takes some time to get them a bit more creamy, and the basic wine shouldn't be too sour. If you start with the basic with, I don't know, maybe 10.5 or 11 grams of Riesling acid, that could be a problem.
At the zero dosage at least, yeah. And I mean, in the Saar region where the grapes are coming from, this easily can happen, right? That you have the acidity at those levels.
Well, it depends on if you have the if you turn to a malolactical fermentation, and that happens in our cellar simply naturally. So I'm never putting anything in to initialize this malolactical fermentation. It simply happens. Normally it's between 30 and 40%.
Okay. And do you see like a kind of talking about consumer trends? Because we talk a lot about the people are going for more and more dry styled wines and less alcoholic wines. Do you also have a feeling with the sparkling that there's a increasing demand for Brut Nature
I think so.
Less sugar?
Yeah, it's a very small niche where we're working in. So we're a small producer, 6 hectares, maybe 30,000 bottles a year. And we are buying some grapes, and of course we have to buy them from Bioland partners, And I think in this, there's a niche that's growing for clear style, authentic things, and pure stuff.
Would you call yourself like a natural winemaker in that
No,
regard?
definitely not.
Definitely not. Okay.
No, it's just maybe the edge of becoming one. So in most of the cases, I'm doing the filtration, and we're adding sulfur, just to say all the guys inside stop working, because otherwise, I think it's a completely different style, and I can't make up my mind about that. But we are not. I'm not a natural winemaker now.
What I really appreciate about the Sekt is, I mean, you have definitely the clear Riesling touch coming out, right? A nicely, highly aromatic, very acidic profile in the nose. I mean, it's crisp, it's elegant, it's pure apple, it's a little bit of quince. It's really the touch of the Saar, where we say it's the coolest subregion of the Mosel. Really a fresh fruit profile. But I really like about it, it's the 40 months on the lease, it was?
Yeah, it's 40 months.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes out nicely. As it really gives us like really good like autolysis connection in the mouth, really gives it like this substance and body that it should have actually, that really pairs nicely well with the acidity. I mean, it's kind of really cool wine to drink, and I don't even like really feel it so much being Brut Nature. Yeah, I mean, feel it bone dry and very acidity driven, but I can imagine that a lot of people who normally would maybe not prefer the totally bone dry style actually will say this is very nice, because
I think you're right, yeah.
Body and substance and a little bit of creaminess and oiliness. It's kind of interesting in the style. I mean,
but this takes time. It takes at least 40 months, and I think the one was 54. But we're also making sparklings from the Chardonnay field plant.
I like some oysters right now, I must say.
But if you prefer, I hate oysters and bubbles. I think it doesn't work really. Yeah. Okay, if you prefer. Unfortunately, we don't grow them in the river, which is not really. That's where located right now in this historical building here, and we are located along the river. Small river. If there's no flood, it's really very small. We had one last year, which was a disaster. And we have the wine, the vinothek here and the old mill, but we do not have a single vineyard here. All the vines and the vineyards are along the Saar and the
Upper Mosel.
And the Upper Mosel.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, so now, to bridge maybe like the topic over to the next wine, but first and foremost, I mean, we talk with all the producers about impact of global warming and changing weather patterns and what we experience out there in nature. And I think especially you as a Bioland member, I mean, that must be something that you really have a look at. You really are very conscious about what's going on out there in nature, right? Could you give us maybe like a little bit your take on it? How, this affects you in your work as a winemaker at the moment?
To be honest, we were maybe by coincidence, but when we started with the winery, we already we started with Chardonnay and Burgundy grapes, and I think that's different from growing Riesling. And maybe that was some kind of, I have no idea, but a good feeling about that. We decided to go onto the shell limestone soil and to grow in Burgundy and not Riesling. And then we bought the Riesling later on. If you see the last years, like 21 was pretty wet for us. 23 was pretty wet, and we had problems with Kirschessigfliege.
So
vinegar,
cherry flu over there.
And then in 24 we had late frost, was very cold, so we lost about 90% of the harvest. And we're not suffering from very hot years during the last years. 20 was pretty hot, 22 was very hot, but we'll simply see.
It is kind of interesting because this is really something that comes up with many winemakers I talk to, that we always have this idea of global warming as a kind of, it's just getting warmer and warmer, right? And making it more difficult to grow certain varieties. But actually, I think we realized in latest years, and it was kind of interesting for me when I attended this sustainability conference in Heilbronn, organized by Bioland, Demeter and Ecovine. There was one of the speakers pointing out that for like many decades, nature was, so to say, a constant. The resources we got from nature, that winemakers or that like agriculture got from nature, came consistently and constant at a certain rate. And it seems a little bit like that what we experience in recent vintages, that this is going to change, right? So we get more like, how you say, like more extreme weather patterns. Rain is falling at the wrong times in the year. Suddenly we have very humid summers.
It's hailing.
Back in 24, it's hailing when it shouldn't hail. This
should never hail. Anyway.
It should. But this is maybe something that we have to work with, right? In the future. So what are you doing concretely in the vineyard for example, like increasing biodiversity? If you could mention some of the initiatives. You said you really work on your soil life and having a lot of like insects, animals, and microorganisms. So what are some takes and initiatives that we could talk about there?
To be honest, just nothing. We simply do not interfere. We are just working in the vineyard, and we're more on the loan, all that's inside. And we're never working in the ground, digging there or doing something like that, plowing. No, we never do that. So I simply leave the soil and leave the ground, and as we are organic, we're not putting any chemicals in there. No herbicides, of course, and all the rest, it simply worked itself. It was just done by itself.
So it's a kind of low intervention approach in the vineyard.
In the vineyard it is. In the cellar, it makes me a bit nervous when people say low intervention in the cellar, because I think it doesn't work. The more natural you're working in the cellar, you have at least to watch, not to interfere, but to watch what's going on.
I think there is a very nice James Suckling quote that I tend to use in master classes I do about natural winemaking, because in Copenhagen and Stockholm and Scandinavia in general, natural wine scene is very, very up and coming and big, right? And I always say, like James Suckling has this great quote where he said, to be a good natural winemaker, you have to be a better winemaker than a conventional winemaker. So even better, because it's so complex to, so to say, control all those like microbiological processes going on in the cellar without interfering, right? So, and this is, I think a lot of people make it very difficult for themselves when they say we do natural wine and we try to do low intervention, because it's very, very demanding to do so. So I think it's good to find a balance, right? To say,
I have no idea if one is a better one or the other. I've really no idea, and I wouldn't dare to make a statement on that. No, I never dare that, but maybe it's a certain, it's a question of of emotion, so of the feeling, what's going on there in the nature, and what's going on even in the cellar. Maybe that's the reason. But I can't make a statement on who's a better winemaker, definitely not, no.
I think that is a constant conflict going on between the natural wine fanatics and the conventional wine fanatics, right? And they will never come along on the table. I always try to tell people, like, wine is a natural product, right? And we're looking for winemakers who work as naturally as possible. And for me, it's always like a debate about style, because two winemakers who work organically or biodynamically can decide on very different styles of wine. So one can say, okay, I try to control my cellar work and do a clear, crisp Chardonnay like we have here in the glass. The other can say, I make it low intervention and I can live with that there's maybe a little bit of mistakes or something like this, or it smells a little bit of Horsetail, or has a little bit of a funky characteristics, right? But this is then more like the question of style that is coming out. And I think your style is more work as, let's say, good as possible in the vineyard, work as controlled as possible or as necessary in the cellar, and just come out with a very clear and crisp style of great Chardonnay here, right? So walk us through the process here. What did you do with the Chardonnay? It's a Chardonnay Air that we have in the glass?
It's a Chardonnay 22. It's a pretty, I think it's pretty young, and that's what we call S. That's a, well, more or less basic one. We call Mosel from the same vineyard. And the other one is the S. And well, if the year and the harvest is really good, we also make one that we call Reserve.
Okay.
We had it in 18 and 20 and 22, and it looks like also in 23.
Okay.
But if the material is not good enough, we simply don't do it. Then we only make the basic one, which we call that we call Muschelkalk. The one is crispy. It keeps in the cellar. It's just bottled and just labeled. It keeps in the cellar for 20, almost 24 months.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. To round it off maybe a little bit, if you look at the future, 5 years from now, where are you as a winemaker? Where's the winery? Where are you going to be headed? Are you increasing your winery size? What comes to your mind? Where are you in 5 years?
I never thought about it. Maybe I have to discuss with Kenzo, our dog. That's the one you always find on the on our labels and everywhere on the advertisement. Yeah, so I've no idea. I think we're not increasing really volume-wise because the wine market seems to be reduced a little bit. But I think I'll follow up. That's the goal. Following up the style, make it very clear, and simply specialize on what we're doing. The Chardonnay field plant, Sauvignon Blanc, and the red ones. And I think in the future we're not going to increase the vineyards or volume in Riesling.
Okay.
Maybe we'll stay with 1 or 2 Riesling and making 1 sparkling. But I think we'll simply focus on the Burgundy and Sauvignon Blanc grapes.
And the Sauvignon Blanc, okay. Yeah, super, super exciting. So yeah, I mean, again, we see you the latest, probably before at some point of time in 2025, but we see you the latest in Copenhagen in 2026 at Cook Wine Summit, where all these great wines can be tasted. And you, of course, can meet Alex Rinke personally. So hope to see you around there. And Alex, thanks for having me here.
It was a pleasure to meet you again.
Looking forward.